I tried to make it more like a living room chat.
I know.
Sorry,
She's
everybody.
such a disruptor. Oh my gosh. She's such a disruptor, and that's
In a good
why,
way.
in a good way, that's why you
Right.
made that film.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have one person joining us, Zoe Ridolfi-Starr, who is the Deputy Director at Know Your 9, and that is a national survivor-run and youth-driven organization working to end gender-based violence in schools. And she's just joined us right now, obviously, because you know who the rest of us are. So Zoe, do you want to start a little bit and just sort of describe what it is that you do?
I would love to.
Okay.
So as Amanda explained, Know Your 9 is a youth-led, survivor-driven national nonprofit, and we work to empower young people in the struggle to end gender violence on college campuses and in K-12 schools. We do 3 primary things as a part of this mission. The first thing we do is educate young people about their legal rights. We educate people about what Title IX is. What does it mean in practice? What rights do you have? I think one of the greatest sort of emotional moments for me within the hunting ground and working with E-Rock was when I recognized that what happened to me was not only wrong, but it was also illegal. And I had not only like the ethical right to be treated better, but a legal right on paper to be receiving different kinds of treatment from my school. And when I sat and talked with Annie and Andrea in that hotel room that was in the film about my rights and started discussing with them all of the dozens and dozens and dozens of cases on my campus that proved an example of the ways schools were violating those rights, that really changed for me how I thought about the issue. And I felt so much more empowered and had a much more secure sense of self, and I was able to sort of process what had happened to me and figure out a way to move forward. So a big part of what we do is educating young people about those rights, hopefully before they experience gender violence so that we can be working to prevent it, but also so that in the case that they do experience gender violence, they understand what their rights are and they can hold their school accountable.
There is so much to be done here. I mean, just to kind of backtrack a little, we've all just sat through, you know, this extraordinary film, which I had the good fortune to see at Sundance, you know, a few months ago. And what a broken system we have. What a broken system. I want to hear more about what it is that you're doing, but I also just wanted to start by asking both Regina and Maria, what attracted you to this subject matter? Because this is a film that is a lot of people are really obviously upset about, because you're calling a lot of people out on some horrendous behavior.
No, sure. Well, I'm Regina K. Scully, one of the executive producers, and there was quite a wonderful team of executive producers who participated in this film. Maria, Cuomo Cole, and I are 2 of this group. And we're, on behalf of the director, Kirby Dick, and Amy Ziering, the producer, the same group of us had done a film called The Invisible War. This is about 3 years ago. You may have heard of it, about the epidemic sexual assaults that were going on in the military. And they brought it to light, and they were doing hundreds and hundreds of screenings across the country to different students at different universities. And they were on track, we all were on track to actually do another film for HBO on the treatment of animals, of all things. And we were all sidelined because at these screenings, there were countless students waiting to talk to Amy and Kirby in particular, tapping them on the shoulder and saying, why don't you please do a movie about the sexual assaults that are going on our college campuses? Please do a movie about that. And they got it so much at so many schools that they literally stopped what they were doing and they completely retracked, and they started doing this film, The Hunting Ground, which you're now seeing the full results of it. So they came back to the same producing team. They said, we have a real serious problem here. We're hearing it repeatedly, and it's so disturbing. And we're talking to many of these students who are coming forward who haven't voiced it before. Recent cases and past cases, I think we really need, there's a moral imperative here to bring this issue to the spotlight and have a discussion about it. So, you know, my passion is about recovery and helping people really, you know, heal and find better ways to address issues that are causing such damage, not only to the survivor, but to then their loved ones and their families.
The whole community.
Yeah, because we know untreated trauma is one of the most destructive forces in a person's life and in their family life and in any relationship they have. So for me, this film was something that just had to be done. And Maria, maybe you have a similar
The only thing I have to add really is that like with military sexual violence and the institutional cover-up, there was a clear parallel with universities and American colleges, and that we felt it was really the part of the total story about how our American institutions address issues, the criminality of sexual violence and rape.
And how do you think the film has been received?
Well, that's a complex question.
I like to ask complex questions.
I mean, it's been received phenomenally well on the whole. I mean, it has stirred the pot. It has
Which is the goal.
fueled the conversation, served as a catalyst for federal legislation, which is tremendous. I mean, that's a tremendous accomplishment already, and one that's underway. And a number of states have actually developed legislation, proudly New York as the first, led by the governor, and requiring all private and public colleges and universities to adhere now to new policies of training and required surveys, et cetera, which, is an important step.
Right, and it's bipartisan legislation.
And obviously every time there's an issue like this, which is challenging the status quo of a very patriarchal society, or an aspect of patriarchal society, which is the education industry, there are people who oppose that, which we're seeing even in the last few days. More people becoming afraid that this film is being aired on CNN tonight, and it definitely challenges the status quo.
It's very true. And someone brought this point up a while back, not a while back, just recently, because there's so much opposition to the film recently with the CNN airing. This film has been out. It aired at Sundance in January. It's been out. It's been screening. It's been in national theaters across the country already. And it only was with the airing of CNN and the promotion of CNN that some of these schools, all of a sudden it became more of an issue.
Do you think that CNN legitimized it? The fact it was on CNN, or why do you think people are panicking now?
I think that television is so powerful as a tool to disseminate information, and obviously it exponentially increases the amount of eyeballs watching this, and I think that they panicked because media creates culture. Media reflects our culture, and media influences, of course, what we think and feel, and so I think that there was, I think there was a panic. Okay, what's a sort of esoteric documentary that only a few see, a few hundred or a few thousands, versus it being on CNN,
which is
treated as real news, as a real national issue for debate, and being viewed by millions. Yes, I think it put the fear of God into them, because whether people believe, don't believe, the truth of it is that our schools, while phenomenal in so many ways, they are brands. They are marketed as brands.
Well, we saw that in the documentary, clearly.
Yes, anyone who's worked behind the scenes in the development offices knows that they are brands like anything else. And by the way, I don't mean that in just a negative sense. These schools need to keep their lights on also, and they are trying to educate a lot of students, and it's an amazing thing. I think that our higher education system in America is the jewel in our crown, and people come all over the world for our schools and our colleges, and rightfully so. They're phenomenal. But there is a problem, and the film is really just trying to put a flashlight on the fact that there is a problem. It's not negating all schools. It's not negating all men or young men at these schools. It's about saying, hey, we've got a problem, and this problem is decades years old. And we have a great opportunity as a whole, as a community, to look at this problem. Let's look at it collectively and do something about it.
I mean, that is the goal, is to raise awareness and to create an alternate model that offers solutions and changes this. Do you think, and Zoe, what has been the impact on the students that you work with that this film now exists?
I think, the points raised so far have been critical. It's really challenged people's perception of what this issue looks like and feels like for the people who are most directly affected by it. But I think it's also helped so many young people realize that they're not alone, that what they went through was not this isolated, singular experience, but this pervasive, part of a really pervasive, deeply rooted cultural problem that's affecting every single campus, and by extension, every single student on every single campus in our country. And it's really galvanized a huge amount of student momentum, which our organization works to try to help organize and channel into real concrete policy change.
Do you think that there is a tipping point where we will actually, I mean, even just that legislation has changed in New York State? I mean, do you think, what is the tipping point where we can actually start to minimize the amount of girls, largely, and some boys assaulted each year?
I think we're at the tipping point. I think that is what this opposition and this pushback is. I think we have tipped, and now people are kind of frantically trying to scramble back up and push us back down in the other direction.
Right? Digital media, viral, people are talking, survivors are talking, the advocacy groups are getting stronger and stronger. These young women, you saw some of the activists in the film. I mean, one of the most positive things that's come out of this film is the advocacy. Again, whether people are pro or against this school, no, they didn't, yes, they did. The fact is that there are thousands of people coming forward and joining these advocacy groups and supporting them and telling their stories. So something in that rings pretty true. And the fact that 85 to 88% are unreported still, these cases. So if we're scared about these, if they're panicking about these numbers, can you imagine when the volcano really erupts? And when they really have a forum to speak out, a lot of these survivors. So better now that we just look at it in a healthy, collaborative way. I think that's really what the filmmakers are after.
I mean, it's actually testament to social media that we saw the girls going online. We saw Skype, we saw Facebook, we saw Twitter, we saw people communicating with one another, which is at the core of advocacy. That's what I saw in the film.
Right. And we see the pushback, and it's pretty vitriolic. You know, no matter what, these survivors, I don't care what anybody says, they are so brave. Anyone to come forward and tell that story, and they know I think it's what they say, it's 2 to 8%. These are studies done that are false reporting or blurry lined. That's a very high percentage left over of real legitimate concern in cases. That's a very, very high number.
I think our culture still really does not create a safe space for victims. I don't even like to use the word victim, to be honest. I mean, being a survivor myself, I don't identify as a victim. And I think that our culture still shames and blames the person on the receiving end of a sexual assault, not just on campus, but everywhere and anywhere. And that is a larger cultural issue that needs to be addressed.
Right. I think it's so interesting, too, when you listen to the filmmakers, that they thought cracking the U.S. military was hard. I mean, to get in, to hear stories and talking to people high up within the military, getting into the Pentagon, screening their film in the Pentagon. They said that was like kindergarten versus trying to crack into higher education. And trying to get people to even speak off the record, let alone on the record, because they were so fearful of retribution and what would happen to them.
They did an incredible job.
Yeah.
Maria, after the film, I was sitting with Regina, like, it's screening on CNN now as we were watching this. And here, out in the world, this film is on CNN, and hopefully hundreds of thousands of people over the next week will see it around the world. What is one of your hopes as part of the filmmaking team that this film will impact? What are you hoping? Well,
in addition to it being recognized as a valid issue, that this is a serious issue for all the reasons we've just discussed, and and also President Obama deserves a lot of credit here, because he had really been leading this effort for the last 2.5 to 3 years, with Vice President Biden leading a task force and creating protocols that have not existed before, and really, for the first time implementing a strict code of cooperative spirit around the issue before legislation's actually been implemented. The film, Regina had mentioned, the impact here, it's actually also had a lot of impact abroad.
Yes.
Australia, the United Kingdom, I mean, these
Canada.
It's not only the United States that's dealing with this issue. So
Absolutely.
it's really, reflective of certainly global concern. And I think that, allowing students to have a voice in this process is very important. So the required surveys, I think, will be a very interesting telltale about the culture of schools. And that is part of the president's requirement, and it's also part of the drafted legislation.
It's a very exciting time to see these changes hopefully implicated in many more states.
And you know, on the positive side, because we're hearing a lot about the law professors at Harvard who wrote the letter, but then we had the law students writing back, and we're hearing about the Florida State University, Florida State president threatening CNN, and you know, CNN still aired it. So we are hearing those stories, and of course the media will capitalize on that. But what we're not hearing is that there are a lot of universities who really, they know there's a problem at their school, and they know that this is a real problem and has been for decades. And they are concerned, and these are people who have their own children who are going off to college, and it's a frightening thought. And so I've seen the letters from a variety of university presidents addressing their alumni and their students, saying, we hear you, and they're doing surveys on their campuses, and they're finding out from their alumni that this has been going on for so long, and their current students, the numbers are so high, you know, about the incidence of the sexual assault. So on the positive side, while we are hearing a lot about the few that are so petrified that their reputation, their schools, but there are so many that are already taking the steps. They know that there's something wrong. So I want to also point that out, that there are many that are starting to do what needs to be done.
We need to hear more about that.
Yes, we do. And I think we will, actually. I think we're going to start to hear more of those coming forward.